Well, maybe I just start by saying thank you again for having me here. Really huge pleasure. I think it was 20 years ago when I was here the last time, and it's even more beautiful than I remember. A lot of green stuff outdoors and bird singing and stuff like that. Today, I'm going to talk about something along the lines of the topic that you see in the title. We were talking with Toby yesterday like how we would sort of make little change to the title and mix maybe some of the stuff that was in my lectures in the last year, also combining it with this sort of methodological discussion, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end to have like proper discussion as well related to anything that you prefer. In the next slides, I will first talk a little bit about general topics, about what I think is sort of meaningful research, this kind of very, very abstract, high-level things. Then I will talk a little bit about the things that I personally have found like the best places to improve the way in which we all do research. And then I'm going to end with explicit example of a study that we did in the last 3 years, and it was a long road for us regarding esports performance and all those things that we did wrong, exactly not as I'm saying that we should be doing, but in general, whatever I'm saying, I think haven't been doing that myself ever, more or less. So if you're feeling that you're not doing something that I'm saying, you're not the only one. I think you're among the 100% people who feel the same. But let's get started and try if this thing works. It does. So what is a meaningful study? I've been thinking about this question a lot in the last 5, 6, 7 years after a lot of things doing research on different topics, and then I started thinking what actually would be meaningful. And when we are involved in multiple projects, usually at the same time, all time is distributed into here and there, and it's kind of hard to focus. And then I felt that this is something that people, sort of existential question that everyone who is involved in research on a daily basis, many hours of our everyday life goes to research, we should be thinking and asking, what is a meaningful study? Here are some things that I ended up putting on a paper over the last years, 3 simple things. First one is it should be reasonable, scientifically valid goal. So whenever we start doing something, I think before we start doing something, this is something that I haven't done many times myself, we usually start doing and then start thinking, what is this good for? But in general, I think a better way of doing it is to have a reasonable, scientifically valid goal in the beginning and then try to answer that question. And indeed, I think a good, meaningful study should also be informative, i.e. able to contribute to that goal. So sometimes it happens that we have this idea, we have this great idea that this is what we're going to do, this is sort of an interesting thing that I want to figure out, and then it turns out that, well, it's not so easy after all. It's not really feasible. The data that we have is just not, able to answer the question that we wanted to do, and it usually goes something like this. Eventually, many people, well, some projects just end up being sort of dropped out, but oftentimes we sort of push them through and might be still informative, might be still valuable to finish the things that we start, but in the end, things are often more difficult than they seem. Finally, I think a meaningful study is trustworthy, so we are able to convince our readers of our claims. And this relates mostly to all these sorts of transparency questions, open science, these kinds of things that are now being discussed a lot in different academic fields, and I will talk more about these things in detail later. But oftentimes we see very interesting studies answering very interesting questions about esports, but we're not fully sure is the evidence sufficient and so on and so on. So these are sort of the last point that I think we should aim at. Okay, so in the airplane yesterday when I was flying here and thinking about what would be interesting before going into those details, what would be interesting to sort of reflect on myself, and I started listing things that I've been looking at in the last 10 years when reviewing, editing esports research papers, also reading a lot of esports and writing a lot of esports, things that I completely failed myself. And I listed 5 things. These are sort of in the order of importance because I think a lot of these things are important in the very beginning, and then latter things are sort of things that you can easily fix. The first ones are not easy to fix if we do not recognize them in the very beginning. First, study has no research question or the research question is not optimally planned. It was great to see earlier today some very nice findings and good research questions, important research questions. So definitely I think a lot of good esports research being done and following these rules, but oftentimes it's very hard to specify the exact thing that we are doing. For instance, we can ask, how do esports players practice? This could be a research question that I think there are already plenty of studies that have asked this specific research question. But it's a completely different research question from if you add just one word to this research question, experience. How do esports players experience practice? And if you're asking the latter question, evidently you need completely different methodology. You need some sort of phenomenological data, you need some sort of experience type of approach to analysis. How do the players experience that? But if you have the first question, you can easily do sort of statistical analysis or do some sort of technical analysis of the things that players have been reported in some existing data set, for instance. But this one-word difference is a very, very critical difference that we should be thinking before we start doing the study, and it's very unfortunate if the study has already been carried out and it seems like there's no match between the question and the answer, and this is something that easily can help a lot of people if you sit down and think about what is the exact question, exact each word that you're going to use when asking your question. All right. The second one, study is not clear about its construct, i.e. what is the concept being studied, and this concerns all fields of science, including esports research, and I think esports research has this one specific thing that keeps on popping up. I think in all of our studies, I think none of us is currently really well able to answer the question, what is esports? As we've already been talking about today earlier, it's very difficult to say, like when we ask a question, what is esports, or what, like the previous question, how do esports players practice? The question already, so who are the esports players, it becomes relevant. And there was a great paper which is not yet published, but I think you can Google this. There's a preprint online by Lintunen at colleagues. I think Sebastian Detailing is the last author, and they were reviewing the concept or construct of competence only within one specific research program, self-determination theory. And we already see that the notion of competence has several different manifestations. It can either be competence as affectance, experience of affectance. It could be as skill use, skill in the course of one's actions. Could be task performance, an intended activity or task to some standard, specifically a standard that requires a certain skill or level. And finally, capacity growth. So how we learn to improve ourselves is competence. And evidently, these are very different things. All are very interesting things, all are very good topics of study. But unless we specify which of these are the ones that we are studying, it becomes very difficult to communicate with each other that which one of these are we referring to, and how do we measure, for instance, competence if we do it like this. Very nice paper. I think you can Google it. Actually, I don't have the name of the paper. Sorry, just ask me. Okay, let's go forward. Number 3. Study is not clear about data and methods. I will go more into details about this when I'll go into my own example. But today in 2024, I think we should all aim at sharing the data that we have collected. It's a very simple and easy thing to do. Of course, ethics questions often limit that, but we shouldn't add a note, something like it's available upon reasonable request in 2024. If the dataset is able to be shared, you should be able to put it somewhere for sharing, even behind the password. Some sort of limited restricted access is possible, but it will be very helpful for archival reasons, for other esports researchers to use, etc. And also when it comes to coding, when it comes to statistical analysis, we have all these great opportunities these days to share those things that help our sort of collaborative, cumulative progress of esports findings. So that's something. I will talk about those methodological questions a little bit more. Study draws inference that is not supported by what was actually done, and this is certainly not the case of esports research alone, but the whole field. This is a slide that I'm stealing from my friend and colleague Matus from a couple of weeks ago. So there's an 880% average increase on highly positive terms in all fields of science. So, and when it comes to words like groundbreaking, unique, novel, it's 15,000% increase. So whenever we publish research, we have to convince people that this is groundbreaking, this is a unique finding. And we don't actually have to do that. There's no need. Like, one study doesn't do that. It's never one study that will make a breakthrough. It's 10 or 100 studies that will collectively make slow progress. So there is this sort of a push to be highly novel, and that's not needed. Being careful about what sorts of inference we draw from what we do. And finally, last point, study does not explain how it has progressed the field. How should we update our beliefs and theories? And this is something that I've been thinking about just within the last 2 years. Been working a lot with different sorts of theories, and I'm not saying everyone should follow this sort of classical falsificationist approach to science, but I think it's a very good thing to reflect on. Sort of asking, instead of adding theoretical frame to a finding, asking, is there actually a match, or is there a mismatch between the theory? Because in a classical sense, if we only use theory to explain, we already assume that the theory is correct. And there is never a criticism of that assumption that, okay, this is a good theory, but let's apply it. But we should also ask, is there something perhaps wrong with the theory if it doesn't really match what we are doing? So I think this sort of critical observation of our underlying premises is useful. Okay, so now moving to a case study or case example, an actual study that we did, and we were really struggling because we tried to do, actually sadly don't have all the authors here listed, but my colleagues Marcel Martonczyk, Matus Adamkovic, and Yevon Jin were collaborators in this work, and we tried to understand esports performance factors that affect esports performance. And initially we thought this is just going to be a easy study, which is going to survey some people, look at some correlations, and see what sort of is related to high performance. And it became exponentially difficult when we tried to reflectively answer all these difficulties that I just presented in all these previous slides. And we definitely failed a lot, but also I think we had some little victories here and there. So let's go in. What skills and attributes are needed to become a successful esports player? I will go word by word some of these things. But first, just as a sort of a disclaimer, we decided to publish this paper or run this paper through a registered reports format, which if you're not aware of that, means that you're running 2 different peer review processes. So you first submit the plan gets a full review. When the plan has been agreed and accepted, you move to doing the study, and then it's reviewed a second time. So you basically get double review for your work. So if you have a topic that you really love, a topic that you feel this is the most important thing for me, run a registered reports format instead of just doing the study and then trying to publish it somewhere. It's a very, very nice thing. So we got a lot of feedback on the way, and a lot of the credit goes to our peer reviewers who are also published on the site if you want to see who and what kind of criticism we received over the way. Okay. Oops, I think I went wrong way. There we go. So evident questions arise when you ask a research question like this. What are attributes and skills? If we talk about attributes and skills, what they are. What does it mean that something is needed? What is a need in this case? What is esports, as we already quickly asked this question. So what is the thing that we are actually studying? And what is success? Different ways of understanding what is success. So let's start with the easy one, esports. It would be very nice to study professionals. It would be really nice. But in practice, unbelievably difficult, practically impossible. It's merely the fact that the differences, the skill differences between like actual professional players who are playing in the same league, they are already in the top 0.000000001% of the player base. So the differences, skill differences between them are so small that it would be totally impossible to have even the statistical power to observe differences in that population. So a reality check, we need to just recruit players and look at their different rankings in order to compare their success in a manageable way, methodologically, statistically. And we choose Counter-Strike and League of Legends because these games are the ones that have the most players. We are able to access enough players by having top-level, sort of a Diamond Plus and so on, level players looking at how they practice. What is success? Also, highly interesting question that has already been studied in esports and sports quite a lot. Would be very happy to discuss maybe afterwards what people think about this. There's actually a very nice paper indexing esports performance. I think it's last year or the year before. I think it's in the, last year. Delphi-based study where experts, esports research experts, and professional esports players were together discussing what when it comes to the concept of performance in esports, what makes performance? And a lot of interesting discussion resulted in a lot of different proposed sort of categories, and we decided to make a split between two different concepts. We can talk about short-term success when it comes to playing, for instance, a single match or a single day. So let's say you want to improve your performance in your next match, you can drink coffee. Maybe coffee will improve your performance. That's short-term success. But if you are interested in your whole career, we're talking about a completely different construct. We're talking about long-term success. You can measure that maybe tournaments, maybe some sort of medals, trophies, or rank. And we chose rank, evidently, because that's the information available when it comes to hundreds of players around the world. So again, have to make practical compromises. And it gets really, really tricky. Even when you think that you have something as specific as a rank, measuring rank, not very easy. So first question, so rank when? You can ask your rank now, but a player might have been having a pause in the last weeks, last months. So you don't want to ask rank now because it could be totally flawed information. Also, you don't necessarily want to ask all-time rank because a player maybe quit and was like high rank or low rank long time ago. So what we compromise again is rank within the last 12 months. So we're talking about performance level within a year. We want to still control the overall best ever rank, and we want to double check this. So we ask all these questions twice in order to ensure that players sometimes accidentally put wrong numbers, etc., etc. but we still don't know, for instance, which mode. Many games have different modes. Many players might have different accounts that they play in different contexts, different social contexts, so it gets very tricky again. We also can ask with whom. Some people play alone, some people play in a specific team, or after how many hours. It's really tricky again to ask something like Counter-Strike. Maybe the player has played FPS games, competitive esports FPS games, a long time before they move to play Counter-Strike, so they essentially have a long history of playing that genre before they actually move. So asking about people's career length, for instance, gets really tricky in relation to rank, and also, of course, character, role, position, these kinds of things. It can be a very different thing to achieve a rank in a specific position versus another position. So a lot of messy data in this sense, but again, we have to make compromises, and hopefully people will do stuff like this better. Our method, if it wasn't, if I didn't say it earlier, we were planning to do survey research. So survey-based research, not direct measurement. Okay, so things get even more complicated. We're now talking about attributes and skills. What are the attributes and skills? Good researchers, as we are trying to be, we are starting by surveying all existing literature on attributes and skills in esports. We find several studies, and we're picking each attribute and skill that has been measured in the past. We find about 25 that sort of systematically appear in the literature, so we are interested in them. But of course, that's only the literature. The literature is always biased, so we have to do something more. We have to ask the players themselves. So we choose players who are actively playing these games on higher rank levels, and we ask them, here are the things, what do you think about these existing, you don't have to read that, by the way. What are these existing things? And we asked 351 players that what do you think about this? And then we ask them, what is missing from the list? So we get more and more and more attributes and skills. So then we can see stuff like when it comes to mobile players say there should be self-control, persistence, teamwork, mechanical skill, game sense. When it comes to FPS players, there's persistence, teamwork, mechanical skill, game sense, and resilience. So some overlap there, but also some different things, and numerous other things that weren't listed here. Okay. So again, of course, this is not sufficient, so we need to get some understanding that does it actually work? Before we start doing the research, we want to know, do our measures actually work? So we run a second pilot. This time we recruit 600 people, so 300 people playing CSGO and 600 people playing LOL. We put all these attributes that we collected and we try to measure, so does it actually work? Now, what we find out is, indeed, in CSGO, we find practice, age, and attention and reaction time seem to be statistically significant, so we find that higher ranked players have these more than lower ranked players. And in LOL, deliberate practice, and age seem to be statistically significant. We run a lot of different optional alternative models and find something else as well, which I'll return to you soon. But before that, one of the interesting things that come up at this point is that, okay, it seems this notion of deliberate practice is relevant. So what is this deliberate practice? I think some of you have heard about deliberate practice, one of the most researched and well-known concepts in performance psychology. Deliberate practice is often credited for Andreas Eriksson, although other people were involved in the development as well, in the late 80s, early 90s, and there's a number of things that are usually involved in deliberate practice. Here's just one list of things that I found like accessible. So intentional, purposeful, systematic. So you want to improve your performance in something, so it should include these things. There should be 100% focus. But as a researcher, how are we going to confirm that the player has 100% focus? There's no way. Like how do you measure focus, especially when we are trying to understand the players like everyday practice over the last year? There's no way to measure that. It's very tricky. Goal-oriented, so it has a specific goal in mind to improve. exploring, experimenting, refining, and requires sustained effort and concentration. These are the sorts of things that in the biggest theory of expert performance, these are sort of the things that we should be measuring if we want to actually understand, is there deliberate practice at place? It gets more complicated. If you read the actual definitions based on which other sports have studied deliberate practice, you can consult these sorts of official definitions. For instance, when individuals engage in practice activity, which is typically designed by teachers, so it doesn't need to be designed by teachers, but it's typically designed. And with full concentration, so again, 100% focus needs to be present, but how do we measure that? Improving some aspect of performance. Again, we don't know what aspect of performance, like endurance. Is that also part of performance in esports? Maybe it is, but should we measure that? Because it feels like endurance or this sort of physiological improvement of performance is not something that we would necessarily include in deliberate practice. So it's very interesting when it comes to the actual practice of operationalizing something like deliberate practice in measurement. There's also another complication because in deliberate practice theory, there's also something called purposeful practice, which is not deliberate practice, but almost the same thing. So how do we separate purposeful practice from deliberate practice? Deliberate practice with expert feedback has also been conceptually distinguished from purposeful practice, which is not informed by expert knowledge. I don't know what is expert knowledge, but this is the kind of material that we basically have to use as a basis when developing a measurement for deliberate practice. Okay, so what we do third pilot. In a third pilot, we recruit 10 top levels, so top 2 tiers in each game. So we have Hearthstone, Counter-Strike, League of Legends. What was the 4th game? Was it Fortnite maybe? Yeah, thanks. So we recruit 10 of those, so it's like Challenger and Master in League of Legends would be the top 2 tiers. And we ask them, how do you practice? Tell me all the things that you practice with. Then we also recruit 2 LCK pro players and 2 pro coaches from LCK and ask them, interview them, what are the things that the best players practice with? And we'll list all those things. Then we do inductive analysis, we put them into the clusters, and then we run a 4th pilot. So we recruit 65 top players and ask them these things that were again said. And then these 65 top players respond our questions and give feedback. Is this sufficient? Do you understand these questions? How would you answer these questions? And then we finally have a measure for deliberate practice. Now, we don't have to read that measure, but there's a lot of different wordings that were sort of developed based on that feedback from these players. And I think we're still not quite happy with what we made, but I think it's at least a little bit progress in terms of measuring deliberate practice in esports. Okay, so I think now we are pretty close to starting our study. We haven't started the study yet, but we are on the way. We have to craft hypotheses. So we have now pretty good hypothesis. We have a good idea what could work. So we are not exploring, we are confirming. So we have hundreds of, well, not hundreds, but dozens of studies who have already explored what works in esports and what doesn't. And now we want to sort of find some confirmatory evidence. This works. This improves success and performance. So we develop exact hypotheses based on our pilot data and existing studies, all those that have been published. So we have hypotheses such as practice improves meaningfully or predicts meaningfully long-term esports success, meaning that the more you practice, the higher your rank is. Pretty simple, very simple. When it comes to deliberate practice, we see in our pilot that actually it seems like in CSGO, there is no correlation. So in CSGO, it seems like when you do these deliberate practice activities that we just talked about, it doesn't seem to correlate based on our pilot. But in League of Legends, it did. So we set 2 different hypotheses for that. And then we have a long list of those other things that we found pretty high correlations. So things like better, i.e. lower reaction time, teamwork ability, intelligence, persistence, younger age, attention, and speed of decision making, things like this. since we don't want to be here the rest of the night, I'm not going to go each of these words one by one and show how we decided to measure them, but there are validated measures for each of them, and we went all through them one by one, and you can find them in the supplements. It's really a fun thing to dig into if you're interested in this kind of research. Okay, so we have now hypothesis, we're planning the study, and there's one more thing before we can start the study, because it gets very complicated when you're actually trying to ask, what is meaningful? Now we're sort of going back to that word in the title, what is meaningful? And also don't need to read that because it gets really tricky. When we talk about what is a meaningful difference, we often see in many fields of science, when it comes to statistics, we're talking about statistical significance and p-values. But that's not interesting. It's not interesting whether something is correlated, because everything is correlated. If we're asking, does the length of your hair affect your esports performance, or is there a statistical correlation, we will find a correlation. Everything in the world is correlated if you have enough data, because the universe is messy. There is always a difference between two groups when you have enough data. So what matters is that how big is that difference? And when it comes to something like the first hypothesis practice, we can ask, how much should there be a higher rank when it comes to more practice? For instance, if you're playing Counter-Strike or if you're playing League of Legends, ask yourself, I'm going to put 1 more hour on practice every day, 1 more hour. So how many ranks should you go up with that investment? What would be a good trade? Is it like, let's say 1 hour? That's 365 hours per year of investment in the game more. If you're going up from silver 3 to silver 2, is that a good trade? Is that a meaningful trade? I don't know. If you ask any statistician about this, sort of what our meaningful effect size is, they don't know how to answer, and this is sort of one of the top research questions across all scientific fields today. How do we assess meaningful statistical difference? We can easily say that there is a statistical difference, but what is a meaningful statistical difference? So we will definitely find that practice will somehow correlate with higher, but how much? So we define in this case that you should be able to observe, with that change, you should be able to observe increase of at least 1 rank. That's our visible difference. It's not much, it's very conservative. It's a very small change. But at least if you practice 1 hour more, you should at least go 1 rank up. Not much, but quite a lot still. This equals to, and again, this is where it gets even more complicated. CSGO has 18 ranks, League of Legends has 27 ranks, so it's actually a different statistical difference between these two games because the other one has more ranks than the other one. So what happens is that we have to say in Counter-Strike, there is a different standardized effect meaningful compared to League of Legends. So in Counter-Strike, we're talking about 0.3. In League of Legends, we're talking about 0.2. And when you see this difference, you'll be able to say there is a meaningful difference when it comes to a change. Okay, now we are ready to do the study. And actually, I'm almost at the end of my slides, so I'm not sure if anybody is interested in the results. What is actually contributing to successful esports performance when it comes to measuring things that affect your rank, or at least correlate with rank. Obviously, we're not able to see causality here, but we are controlling it, but we don't have time for that. Let's see. So we go one by one, the hypotheses that were in the previous page. Let's start with practice. When it comes to practice, we actually see, we see a statistical, meaningful statistical significance when it comes to League of Legends. So in League of Legends, the more you play, there is a meaningful change in your rank upwards. But when it comes to CSGO, we don't see that. That's actually just how we found from the earlier data and pilot studies. So this seems to be the case. When it comes to deliberate practice, it's absolute zero. It's like you cannot have more zero than what we have. We have 0.01 and 0.02. It's like, it's so close to zero that you can get. So deliberate practice, as we measure it here, doesn't seem to work. Now, we can again say like maybe that measure that we were using wasn't really getting into that concept. We remember those complicated descriptions that Ericsson and colleagues have been providing, so maybe we misunderstood them, and our reviewers and our editors also misunderstood them. Like, this remains to be debated, but at least when it comes to the data that we have here, it seems like deliberate practice doesn't work in esports. But maybe the future will tell something different. Okay, other things. One interesting thing that we can confirm is age, and this actually has been shown in previous studies as well. So younger players are more higher rank. So when it comes to older players, their rank seems to go down. And this is an interesting question. Why does this happen? Because now we're also controlling, of course, the practice time. So it's not that they just play more. What we see is that I don't know, maybe they have social networks that sort of help them go up. Maybe we are talking about some sort of biological factors that people lose some of that skill when they get older. But anyway, in both games, we see meaningful effect of age. And when it comes to attention, this seems to be important in CSGO, but not in League of Legends. So kind of logical, maybe. Like, if you played both of those games, you can know that in CSGO, attention plays a significant role, but maybe also in League of Legends, who knows, but not so much, at least based on this data. And finally, everything else, absolute zero. So nothing else seems to have any statistically meaningful effect. And our sort of final contribution, that when we start thinking about all these findings and all these data and all these stuff that we did, we have one new hypothesis, and I'm really happy to talk about this if this is something that you could resonate with. So we call that information density theory, which means that when it comes to games like League of Legends that have tons of information, you have millions of abilities and character champions and items, and everything changes every 2 weeks. In order to perform well in that game, you actually need to practice a lot, just manual, everyday hours into the game, because you can't keep up with the game unless you have that information. You can't really get that information unless you're like, reading the guidebook when you're lying on a sofa or something. But I think very few players actually do that. So I think the more information in a game, the more actual manual practice plays a role. And when it comes to Counter-Strike, which has, of course, a lot of information as well, and it has a lot of sorts of implicit skill learned by playing, but perhaps, as we know from that finding that attention seems to play a critical role, maybe in games like Counter-Strike, there are other factors that go in more than just the playing hours. So that's something that we haven't confirmed. That's something that we look forward to working more in the future. Hopefully we'll find ways to sort of triangulate this sort of theoretical approach to esports performance, but I think this is where I will stop. I have no clue how long it takes, but maybe we'll still have time to chat a bit.